Welcome, everyone. We want to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. We want to welcome everyone to Alpine University's July webinar. Our topic today is, I get it. Security is important, but now what? We appreciate your joining us today. My name is Yana Hairston, and I work here on the marketing team at Alpine. We'll get started with our presentation in just a couple of minutes, but wanted to make just a couple of announcements before we get started. Just a note to let you know that we're finalizing the remainder of our 2015 webinar schedule over the next week, and we'll be posting those dates and topics on our website, so make sure you check back. If you find value in attending today's webinar, make sure to register for our August webinar that will be held on August the 5th. We'll be talking with Alpine's Director of Technology Solutions, Blair Harris, about badging. We encourage you throughout the presentation to post your questions, and if you have questions throughout the presentation, please make sure you post them in the Q&A panel that can be found at the top of your screens. Please post any of these questions to all panelists rather than selecting individual presenters. And if you're having any problems seeing the webinar, please close down and restart the WebEx application. If that doesn't work for you, please call WebEx support at 866-229-3239. And last, before we get started, we will be covering lots of information today, but don't worry if you don't catch it all, because we're recording this presentation. So if you miss something, you can always review it once the presentation is posted to the Alpine website. We'll be sending out an email within a couple of days with the link to the recording and the full slide deck. So without further ado, our presenters today are Jill Burrows, Alpine's Director of Security and Senior Security Consultant, Shane Freeman, a member of our Alpine Technology Solutions Group, and Jill Van de Heuvel, psychometrician here at Alpine Testing Solutions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill Burrows. Jill?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Yana said, our presentation today is I get it. I know security is important, but now what? My name is Jill Burrows. I've been in the security industry for about 20 years. And I was the director of a certification program for 10 of those. So let's get started. Let's talk about security. At Alpine, we've used security as part of your holistic validity evidence. And what we mean by that is that in order to have a valid exam, you need to make sure that security is part of every part of your program. And we like to look at security in the framework of prevention, detection, and enforcement. So what I'm going to focus on today is prevention. So when I talk about security, I see it as a continuum. There are no absolutes because there are inherent risks in what we do. And no matter what, we need to protect our exams, and the best way to do that is by layering security. The more layers we put in place, the more secure our exams will be. So let's talk about some best practices in prevention. I like to look at prevention in three big buckets, the first of which being education, second, policies and procedures, and the third, holistic test design. So many times when you hear someone talking about security and education, they're talking about educating their candidates or educating their industry. But what I want to focus on is educating ourselves. And what I mean by that is we really need to identify and understand the threats to our individual programs before we can put a plan in place to help prevent them. Everyone's program is different, and although we may have some threats that overlap, they're unique in presentation and by candidate population. And these differences really need to be recognized, and your security program needs to be customized to your risk profile and budget. So I think many of us have been educated on the use of technologies to limit security incidents, and I'm a huge fan of using them when they make sense. But you need to determine what the priorities are for your security program and where you will get the most bang for your buck. So a couple of examples, web patrol. I really believe web patrol is necessary for all programs, but the extent to which you do it will differ. Some programs can get away with just using Google Alerts to monitor the web and use the money they would have spent on an expensive web patrol service someplace else that will be more effective in mitigating their individual risk profiles. The same with biometrics. It's a great technology and several programs are using it. And it's really a great help to thwart proxy testing. I highly recommend biometrics if your program is delivering tests in red zone areas or you don't use any type of prerequisite screening with your candidates. But if you have an extensive prerequisite policy in place, you test in one of the more secure channels and use other forms of authentication, biometrics may not give you a lot of extra protection and it can be expensive. So again, just educating ourselves on what our risk profile is and how best to use our security budgets to mitigate our individual risks. So policies and procedures. Those can be both internal and external. So we'll start with internal policies. Limiting access to your item banks internally on a need-to-know basis is extremely important. Not everyone needs access, and you should never give access to your item banks based on a title. It's been my experience that most programs, even large ones, can limit the number of people internally to those that need it to do their day-to-day jobs. If you create content, if you review content, or you publish content, you need access. If one of those three things is not your day-to-day job, you should not have access to the item bank. As I mentioned before, instituting prerequisites is a great policy to implement. This automatically limits the number of people that see your item pool and makes it much more difficult for proxy testers and harvesters. Now, it's not impossible, but it does make it more difficult. I know that some programs cannot use prerequisites based on certain business issues, but if you can't use prerequisites in your larger program, consider using them on your beta or your test pools by pre-approving your beta candidates. It's a way to better protect your item pool before it goes live. There's nothing more frustrating than finding out you've lost your item pool before you've even launched your test. IT information security is extremely important. You need to make sure that your IT department has put network security policies in place to protect your data and how you transmit your data to your vendors. Training. I can't stress training enough. And this is not only important for your internal employees, but also for your vendors. You need to make sure that your employees are aware of your security protocols and are following them. A security audit can be very helpful in determining if your employees and vendors are following the policies that you've taken so much time to write and implement. So do you have a plan? This is my favorite question to ask people. Do you have a plan? And what I mean by that is, do you have a critical incident response plan in place? If you have a breach today, do you know what to do next? If you have a breach, the longer it goes without investigation and adjudication, the worse the impact to your program. So having this response plan in place can save you precious time if something occurs. So a few things to consider when you're creating your plan. You need to identify the stakeholders at your company that need to be involved. This will be different for everybody, depending on whether you're a for-profit company, an association, a not-for-profit. Sometimes boards need to get involved, but make sure that those stakeholders are identified. You also need to put one person as your point of contact for all information. This can be your security manager, this can be your director of exam development, but one person needs to be the collector of information so that there is one source. Now, your individual processes and steps will be completely different depending on the type of organization you work for, but you need to make sure that each incident follows the response plan so that everyone is treated the same and the adjudication is fair and equitable. So holistic test design. Holistic test design is becoming kind of a buzzword in the test security industry. So what does everyone mean by holistic? To me, it means that security is part of the design throughout the entire life cycle of the exam. And security is in the forefront of your minds when you're determining process and procedure for your programs. So for example, during test design, you determine that your business strategy requires you to deliver your program globally. What does that mean for the security of your program, and what design measures should you undertake to ensure your program is as secure as it can be? For content creation, knowing your program is global and will be delivered in third-party centers around the world, this should be a consideration when determining what types of items you're going to create and how large your item pool needs to be. And again, this goes for some psychometrics and maintenance. How often and what types of psychometric analysis should you be running? Knowing the types of threats that your program is coming up against should shape your maintenance program. And finally, when we talk about prevention, it all is a matter of being relative to your budget. The most important thing is to do something. Do something to prevent the security incident before it happens, because no matter how much you spend on prevention, it will be less than what you will have to spend if it does happen and you have to go into enforcement. So whether it's taping pieces of paper to your candidate's head, or once you have a few more dollars, you tape folders to their head, do something. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Shane, who's going to talk to us about detection.
Great, thanks, Jill. Glad to be here today. Once again, if anybody has any questions for Jill or for me, please feel free to post those in the Q&A panel. We'll do a big Q&A session at the end. But what I'm going to try and talk about today a little bit is using technology to automate some of the detection processes and also what you do once you have a security incident. So using technology to enhance exam and program security, we can do a few different things, or we're going to talk about a few different things today. One is detecting exposed content, one is detecting policy violations, detecting unintended advantage, and then also how we can automate some of your enforcement practices. You know, unfortunately, exposed content is pretty rampant. And I apologize if you're one of the companies that are seeing yourselves on the screen right now, but we all know that there are a number of websites out there that are publishing exposed content. And you know, while we hate for this to happen, unfortunately it's happening a lot. And I think more than anything, this becomes a big red flag. And while there are a number of ways to detect that this is happening, so Jill mentioned Google Alerts, and Google Alerts is great because it's free and you can set it up on your own and you have Google do all of the heavy lifting. There are third-party services out there that you can also employ that will go out and scan the web for your content. Unfortunately, these are very predictive in that once your content has been released to into the wild, you can't pull it back. And also, unfortunately, it's very expensive to combat this. So if you do want to try and pull your items off of the web, it's going to cost a lot of money usually and a significant amount of time. And you may also have to get legal resources involved. So, a couple of types of detection that we have can help with beyond just exposing or beyond just recognizing that your content has been exposed. So the one is pre-import detection, and that's what we mean by pre-import is that before we assign a pass-fail grade or before we award a credential, we can actually run one of your exams through a number of security scripts that will help identify potential issues. In this case, an exam can be invalidated and a credential is never granted. Another option is post-import detection through reporting and analysis. So once we have all of the results in, we can actually hand a lot of that data, whether it's for a specific exam or whether it's a number of exams or the entire program, we can hand all of that over to a psychometrician. And if they find issues, exams can be invalidated at that point, but usually a credential may have to be revoked in that case, which is also not all that much fun. So when we're looking at one method of pre-import detection, the first one that comes to mind is detecting policy violations. And these are usually pretty cut and dried. They kind of go back to Jill's slide about creating the accurate policies that you need to run your program. So for instance, a retake policy. If you only allow candidates to retake an exam after 30 days, if we import an exam into the credential management system and we find out that they've taken it within that period of 0 to 30 days, we can automatically invalidate that exam. Jill also mentioned harvesters, and if you have somebody who passes an exam and then goes back and retakes it again, there's a high likelihood that there's something fishy going on there as well. So we have security flags that can help you examine those candidates in their process. Eligibility rules or authorization rules, if you only want to allow your candidates to take an exam after you have authorized them or given them an eligibility, if they choose to take that exam before the eligibility has been granted, you can also automatically invalidate that exam. And then really any custom policies that your program might need can be integrated into an automated procedure. So when we look at unintended advantage and we compare that to, and we frame it around pre-import testing. So again, we're looking at things that we're looking at situations where the candidate has not been granted a credential yet. So through automated security scripts, individual exam results can be examined automatically and then and evaluated in the same manner every single time. So this first graph that we're looking at down here, if you look at the x-axis, it says total exam time, and the y-axis says exam score. That top left-hand quadrant are people who have passed the exam with a very high pass rate, and they've done it in a very short period of time. So we know that those are suspect candidates, and I'm not saying that technology has to be the one to invalidate an exam at that point in time, but we can definitely flag those folks for further review. Another option that we have is looking at the content on your exam from new content versus old content. So what you're looking at here in this circle is really a representation of a full exam, and you'll notice that there's 60% kind of old content on this exam and 40% new content on the exam. And then that green bar that overlays it actually shows that this candidate has an 85% pass rate on the old content and a 25% pass rate on new content. And this is really, really easy for us to look at from a technology perspective. And if you have candidates falling into this scenario, there's a high likelihood that there is an unintended advantage that would need to be looked at. And the picture on the right, if we happen to have to invalidate an exam, that's a lot easier than invalidating or revoking a credential. So we're going to upset the candidate, but probably not as bad as it could be. If we do find an issue, there is a few different things that we can do to this candidate. So we can flag the candidate for reporting purposes, which is what I'm going to talk about in my next slide. We can flag the candidate and send a warning email, and we can notify them, you know what, we think there's suspicious behavior going on, there's anomalies in your data, just wanted to let you know, so you might be able to correct the problem in the future. We can flag that candidate and send them for review, and somebody on your program or with the help of a psychometrician can look at those, the item level details, and they can either invalidate that exam, they can place that candidate on a banned or a watch list. So if a candidate shows up on a banned list, any exam that is imported while they're on that banned list would not be counted towards their credential. We can add them to a watch list that would automatically flag every exam that comes in that might flag somebody in your program to look at the exam details. And frankly, we can approve it too. So maybe there was no issue. Maybe we flagged it on accident. And that's, again, where I think Jill is going to talk to us next about the benefits of having a psychometrician be really, really involved in your security plan. And then the last thing, we can automatically invalidate that exam. So if it is a policy violation, if somebody has taken an exam in a shorter amount of time than you want them to retest in, then we can automatically invalidate that. So this is the kind of the worst case scenario, and if we are doing analysis after we have granted a credential, we're really making people angry if we have to revoke that credential. So data from multiple exams, or in some cases your entire program, can be compiled and exported for further psychometric analysis and review. So one of the chart in the bottom left-hand corner is looking at collusion. The chart in the middle is looking at average pass rate by test center. So you see those three test centers that we've highlighted in green have an extraordinarily higher pass rate than everybody else does. And when we're looking at things very holistically from a program perspective, we can start to see where some of your major issues are at. So that's a lot of the stuff that we can handle from a technology perspective. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have after this. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jill.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Vandenheuvel, and I'm a psychometrician with Alpine Testing Solutions. And today I'm going to be talking to you about why to run custom reports. What is the advantage of running ad hoc reports after you've gone through the process, as Shane described, of having these automated scripts, and you have the process in place that Jill Burrows talked about? Why would you want to do anything additional? I mean, doesn't the plan you have already cover all of your needs? So I'm going to talk about a little bit about why to run custom reports, and then I'm going to dig a little bit into a particular custom report just so that you can see kind of the benefits and what you would get out of some of these types of reports. So the first reason to run custom reports is to actually help establish the flagging criteria that you would put into those automated scripts that Shane was talking about. You need to do this in order to make sure that the flags meet their needs and the purpose of the exam. So for example, if you have a very complex exam and candidates are earning high scores in a very short period of time, that graph that Shane had shown with exam scores by the exam time and kind of that left-hand quadrant. What should your thresholds be? For a very complex exam, a short amount of time might be a long amount of time when compared to a more entry-level exam or just a less complex exam. And what I mean by that is that it might be that a short amount of time is 30 minutes on a very complex exam, and that on a very simple exam, 10 minutes would be a short period of time for candidates to get through the items, and if they got through the items in that amount of time and earned a high score, their behavior might be viewed as suspicious. So you do some custom reports before you set your security scripts, just because you need to make sure that the scripts you set are appropriate for each of the exams that you're setting them for, so that they really meet your needs and your purposes. They also need to be systematic. You need to make sure that you're applying the same flagging criteria for anybody taking a particular test. So you can have different criteria for different titles, potentially, But you're going to need to make sure that the criteria you have is systematic and that there's a rationale in place as to why it was decided what a short amount of time was on the test. The flagging criteria also help to make sure that everyone, the candidates or the test centers, are treated the same way. That goes back, Jill Burrows had talked about it, Shane had talked about it. Systematic treatment of your results and your records is really important. You don't want to be questioned for picking on a candidate or a test center, for example. Another important note about custom reports, but all reports, is that flags and scripts provide triggers. They don't provide proof of a problem. There are sometimes very valid and appropriate reasons for what seem to be unusual behaviors, such as high scores and low times, or a test center with very high scores compared to all other test centers. An example of this is when you have a corporate event potentially, or an organizational event at which the exam is being offered for free, or just being offered there at that event. And so it makes it very easy for your candidates to come and take your exam. But you've also likely have the most able candidates at that event. And so you are likely to see high scores and potentially very short times for that test center that was set up during that event. So just because that test center may end up being flagged with your scripting criteria, with your automated scripts or something else, you need to look at it and go, oh, that was the test center that we set up. It makes perfect sense. Look at the list of names of who these people are. It makes perfect sense that they passed and that they passed quickly. This is easy content for all of these people. Custom reports also allow you to drill down into the data of interest to gather more information. Again, you can break things down, candidates, test centers. You can really drill in to find out exactly what you are looking for and yet do it in a way that you're still doing it systematically and treating everyone the same way. And it goes beyond the flags. It goes beyond those automated scripts. And again, it's a custom report. It lets you get at the information that you are specifically looking for. So based on all that I said, now what? All right, so you have a plan in place like Jill Burrows had recommended. You've got automated scripts that have already been set up. You determined what your flagging criteria would be, and your script comes up with a test center that has a lot of flagged candidate records. Now what do you do? All right, so now you need to try to look into that test center and see if you can see what's happening. One potential ad hoc analysis that can be run is called a Z-score by Z-time report. And what this does is it can compare records based on any demographic characteristic where a minimum sample size requirement is met. You want to make sure that the sample size is large enough to be making appropriate conclusions about folks that fall into that group, candidates that meet the requirement of that group. And when I say demographic characteristic, I want to make sure that I'm clear that that doesn't mean ethnicity or gender, though it could. Typically here we're talking about test centers or geographical regions or red zones, as Jill Burrows had discussed. So any characteristic like those that you have in your data that you would want to dig into, you can dig into with a Z-score Z-time report. The advantages of this type of a report is that it uses all of your data at a programmatic level. The data is standardized, and so comparisons can actually be made across exam titles. So you can actually see behavior at, for example, a test center, regardless of the exam titles being administered at that center. It's systematic. Everybody's treated the same. The data goes in, and you're not picking on anyone. You're just looking at your results and making comparisons. You also develop and have more statistical power by doing averages across those multiple exams and titles. Again, not simply looking at one title or one test center. So if you choose to run a Z-score or a Z-time report, what are you going to get? You get a brief summary that's written by a psychometrician. The psychometrician is going to review this entire report and provide you with a written summary of what the report is telling you. You're going, and we're going to go through an example report in just a second here, so any of you thinking about submitting questions about what does this mean, give me another couple minutes, and in the upcoming slides I'll be showing you some of these things, just probably not the brief written summary. You're going to be able to see the number of flags by demographic group. You're going to be able to look at a breakout of demographic groups that have combination flags, such as high average Z-score and low average Z-time. Again, that's one of the groups that would be of most concern. That's the group that's going to fall into, at the exam level, Shane's graph that showed, again, high score and low time. And their reports breaking down information for each of those demographic groups, for each exam title, and for the candidate records, so that you can really dig all the way down as far as you would like to go. So this is what the flag counts would look like, and I apologize if this is a little tiny to read, but the table in the upper left-hand corner is showing you the different flags, the reason for the flag, and then the number of flagged test centers. In this instance, I used test centers as our demographic variable of interest. I want to make sure that I point out right now, before I dig any further into this, that the test center IDs are not real test center IDs. They're not designed to be real test center IDs. If they resemble a test center ID, that is completely unintentional. These are actually just random numbers that I had generated. So there is no link between these test center IDs and any test center that exists anywhere, to the extent that the test center IDs are all just random numbers. Where there is a link to truth is that this is based on actual data and actual results. So there's no identifying information here, but this is what results really can and do look like. So what we see is we have the number of flagged test centers in the upper right-hand or upper left-hand table, and then down to on the below table, we actually pull out those 8 test centers that had a high average Z-score and a low average Z-time, and we report what those values are, the number of administrations at each of those test centers, what the 2 flags were, and also any prior flags. Now, in this instance, that column is blank. However, had you already run this report once previously, and one of these 8 test centers had been flagged previously, we would put that information in here for you. So, or you could get it put in there so that you would know, for example, that a test center this time was being flagged for a high average Z-score and low average Z-time. And last time that you'd run this type of a report, that same test center had just been flagged for low average Z-time. So they hadn't really captured your attention quite yet or quite to the same degree. So this is some of the summary information that we provide or can be provided. There's also a breakdown by test center. You can look at each of the test centers, the number of administrations at that test center, and then the average Z-score for that test center and the average Z-time for the test center, along with any flags that are there. You can see that there's a color scale in here on both the score and time, but they're opposite. So on the Z-score, red or high Z-scores are the most problematic, so they're red, and the lowest Z-scores are green. They're the least problematic. These are scores that are falling well below the mean in general. And then your average Z time is the opposite. We're concerned about low time and high scores. So here, red values are lower time and green values are higher time. So the color scales are reversed. We also have a breakdown by exam number or exam title. And here you would get a count of all of the exams of that title that had been administered during the period of time that you're looking for this report to be based on. Then the actual, the average score and the standard deviation of the score, along with the average time and the standard deviation of the time by exam title. Now in this instance, we can actually provide average scores because it's the and average time values. We don't have to standardize those values simply because they are for a particular exam title. So any given exam title, the average scores can be directly compared, and so can the average time, because a particular title will have the same score range and the same time limits applied to it. And so therefore, in this instance of summary, there's no need to standardize those values. For those folks who like interesting looking graphs, you can also create bivariate standard normal distribution density functions looking at the z-scores and the z-times and the probability of the different events occurring. The most common or the most likely results are those that are in the center kind of this bullseye, and the least likely are down in the base of the graph, so down on the lowest end of the probability. So there's several different views so that you can see this in different ways. Whatever orientation kind of helps to make your whatever orientation makes it helps you visually make more sense of what those results look like for your title and for your information for your program. At this time, I'm going to pass it back to Jana to open the floor to questions, I believe.
Thank you, Jill. We will go ahead and get started with questions. Feel free to continue to send in your questions at this time if you have additional questions. So the first question that I would like to offer to our panelists is, we do not use test centers, but we analyze per administrator because they move from location to location. Can reporting be set up by administrator?
So this is Jill Vanden Heuvel, and I'll take this because I think this was based on my discussion of test centers. And yes, you would be able to do the reporting by administrator, assuming that that information is contained in your data. So as long as you have provided administrator information with every candidate record, then it would be possible to use administrator as your demographic variable of interest.
Thank you, Jill. Next question, I believe, is probably for you as well, Jill. How do we get these kinds of reports? Are these reports available for clients that have certain metric security feature implemented, or does it require some sort of customization?
These types of reports are available for clients with cert metrics security options and data in cert metrics. You simply need to make the requests, and the psychometric team can work with you on making sure that we produce the reports that will meet your needs.
Wonderful. So it looks like we have another question that has come in, and this question is asking, what steps should my program take if we see a demographic group with abnormal results?
Okay, so these are all coming right to me. This is great. If you find a demographic group with abnormal results, you really need to look to see if there's a reason for those results. So as I had said in the example that I gave, that it's possible to have results that appear abnormal, and yet they appear abnormal for completely normal and reasonable reasons. And so, again, no report provides proof of a problem. It simply provides a jumping point for further investigation and for follow-up to see what is actually happening at that test center or whatever your demographic variable of interest would be.
Okay, Jill, and it looks like you are on the hot seat one more time for a question. The next question, I think, is how do I know if my results are abnormal but appropriate versus abnormal but malicious?
That's a great question. If you don't have a reason for the results, such as a corporate event where the experts were gathered, or some other similar type of situation, at that point, I would say you need to start looking to see whether or not there is any malicious behavior occurring. You, again, can't prove malicious behavior based solely on the result of analysis. However, the more your analysis points to malicious behavior occurring and you're developing a theme around the information you're gathering, the more investigation that you can do that drills into what exactly is happening in that situation. And so really, it all comes down to knowing or looking into what could be happening and an innocent until proven guilty type of approach. Keep looking for a reason that makes those behaviors make sense, and when you can't find one, then maybe you're looking at something that's problematic. Equally, if you go through a security audit type of process, as Jill Burrows had discussed, that will help you to determine what kind of your criteria are for what might be malicious behavior and where you might expect odd results, and yet that behavior still being what you may determine to be appropriate.
Jana, this is Jill Burrows. I'd like to just add something to what Jill Vanden Heuvel said. When we talk about this behavior and we use the word malicious, in order to prove malicious behavior from an investigative perspective can be very difficult. So that's why when Shane was presenting, he was talking about unintended advantage. And I think what you can do, and Jill, please jump in here, you can show that the data is showing something that is anomalous, and you don't necessarily need to prove it was malicious, but you can see in the data that there was possibly an unintended advantage, which is much easier to adjudicate than actually saying something was malicious. So depending on what your goal is in the data that you're analyzing, if it's just to determine if someone had an unintended advantage and you need to invalidate those scores, or if you're actually looking for malicious behavior and cheating, those can be two different things. And again, malicious behavior, very, very hard to prove. So sometimes unintended advantage is an easier route to go.
Thank you, Jill. All right, as we wrap up, we would like to invite you to get in your last questions, if you have any at this time. Okay, well then, I just wanted to say on behalf of the entire Alpine team, thank you again for joining us today. Our August webinar that is scheduled again for August the 5th will be about badging. You can register by visiting our website at www.alpinetesting.com and selecting the newsroom link in the main menu. So thank you again for attending, and we will look forward to catching you the next time. Have a great day.